Good evening, everyone. I'm Chris Clancy, and this evening we are going to go through the 1800s, which if you're like me, it feels like we are in this century forever during the school year. So for the next hour or so, we're going to go through as much as we can. I'm going to hit pretty much what I would do as a review with my own students as a highlight. So if there's anything that I do not cover that you have a question on, please ask. My goal is to go for about 30 minutes, maybe 45, and then open it up to questions. So with that, let us begin. Let me see if I can get it started. There we go. Are you seeing the presentation yet? Because it's showing up on my screen. You should see it says Fiveable. Okay, there we go. So welcome to tonight. We're going to cover what I call the long century. It's the 19th century or the 1800s. I am Chris Clancy. I teach AP European History and AP World History. I'm also an AP reader. I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to help you out as best as I can. And again, if you have questions about anything that's not in this presentation, please don't hesitate to ask, okay? Don't forget, there are going to be 2 more subject reviews tomorrow for AP World History. And then every Monday is AP World History. Every Wednesday at 7 is A Push, and every Wednesday at 8 is AP Euro, all Eastern Standard Time. Make sure you're following us on all the social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And then let's jump right into it. So the 19th century. All right, why is the 19th century so influential? There are a lot of different reasons we could go into it. This is what I would say is the big things to keep in mind, especially if it comes up as a essay topic. All right, politically speaking, the 1800s was massive, massive change. Okay, you've got the rise of conservatism as the reaction to the revolutions. Then you have revolutions as a reaction to conservatism. So it's a lot of tit for tat, back and forth, right? Economically speaking, it is completely upending what Europeans and the world especially knew at that time as basic economics. Industrialization changes so much, so rapidly, that really a lot of people didn't know how to handle it. Think about, you have a cell phone. If you were to talk to somebody who was born 30 years ago, we would never even imagine something like this coming about, right? And then that took only a little bit amount of time for it to change. And in the 1800s, things were changing so rapidly and such a grand scale that it upended everything in their lives. We see also the rise of socialism, communism, which are not the same thing. They are related to each other, but they're not the same thing. And then also imperialism, okay, but new imperialism. So for different reasons, then we have what's sometimes called colonialization. And then also with society as a whole, we have what's called mass society. This is due to that industrialization, free time and fun and expendable money, right? Then we have all the isms. There are so many isms, we really don't have time to go through all of them. We're gonna go through as many as we can. I think at one time in my class, I counted there were like 58 isms that we went through. And then art is an expression not just for the rich now, but for everyone. So we'll start with the first part of the 1800s, which is right after Napoleon. So Napoleon is kind of, in my opinion, the one who sets the stage, okay? He's the one who gives us this whole back and forth between liberal and conservative, socialist and capitalist. And so what I would say is the reason we start with him is that he kind of sets the stage, right? So after his final defeat at the Battle of Waterloo, okay, we've got to figure out what are we going to do with Europe? Are we going to try to put it back to what it was? Are we going to start something new? And so we're kind of playing this whole, game, basically, right? And so we have what's known as the Congress of Vienna, okay? So they get together, they decide, all right, how do we want to put it back together? And you've got 5 countries that are mainly the ones in charge. Great Britain, Russia, Austria, France, and Prussia, okay? Now, oddly enough, people seem to always question, why is France there? They're the ones who caused all of this. But I really want to point out here that you can use this as a great way to compare the end of World War I and consequences from both. Okay, end of World War I, Germany is completely blamed and gets told they're going to pay millions and millions of dollars, and no one does anything to help them. End of the Napoleonic Wars, yes, France has to pay, but they're also going to help prop up the French government, which did not happen at the end of World War I. So you see this as a way to compare and contrast the two endings as a way of impact on Europe. Alliances are a big thing here as well, okay? The alliances, you've got the Holy Alliance between Russia, Austria, and Prussia. You've got the Quadruple Alliance, which is Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Great Britain. And eventually they're like, okay, France, you can join us. Alliances are never a good idea and always the best idea. It's this dichotomy of like antithetical ideas, okay? Balance of power, though, is the biggest thing that comes out of Congress of Vienna. Okay, the balance of power is what is supposed to prevent Europe from descending into war all over again. Right? Think about the balance of power when we talk about it with World War I. Again, you can really compare a lot of things here. The idea is that if Britain has a really good navy, all the other nations have a good navy. That way, no one can fight each other and win. No one can dominate. You can also compare that to the Cold War, mutually assured destruction. Right? The idea of the balance of power really was to prevent one man, like Napoleon, from doing what he did all over again. Okay, because that a concept of one man radically changing the continent really shook monarchs to their core. The Congress of Vienna, with that balance of power, we have to have a way to actually enforce it. And that's what the Concert of Europe is. It's these 5 nations saying, okay, anytime there's a revolution, we're going to get together and we're going to put our foot down, and we're not going to have any kind of liberalism. We're not going to have any kind of nationalism. It is going to be conservative ideals only. But that leads to a really big slippery slope, because if you've ever read the book, if you give a mouse a cookie, the next thing he wants is milk, and then he wants a napkin, and he keeps going and he keeps going. It's the same thing with people. If you give them a taste of freedom, you can't take it away, because what are they going to do? They're going to fight you for it. They're going to want it back. And so the conservative reaction to Napoleon is already setting them up for failure, because they're going against what the people wanted. Could they have found a balance between conservative and liberal ideas? Maybe. But in their world, they felt conservatism was the best way to go about this. And so that's one of the things that we see come out of the Congress of Vienna. And it's going to exacerbate a lot of the issues that Napoleon brought forth. Rather than squishing it, it exacerbates that issue. Also, guys, if I'm talking too fast, just let me know. I have a tendency sometimes to talk too fast. So from there, we can kind of jump into the middle of the 1800s. We're going to kind of go back and forth with ideas rather than in just a linear time frame. You get from the Concert of Europe and the Congress of Vienna, that leads us into those revolutions of 1848. There were so many of them. We don't even have time to cover all of them. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover the big ones. And we're going to cover the lead up to it. All right. So the Concert of Europe, great idea on paper, great idea in practice for a while, but there was one small problem. Great Britain. Great Britain, as much as it talked a big conservative game, was way more liberal than the other monarchies of Europe. And because of that, they were the weak link in the Concert of Europe. And by the 1820s, especially after Waterloo, they were no longer really ones who were going to stop any kind of liberalization. And we see that with these revolts that happen all out throughout the continent prior to 1848. Two of the biggest ones here are the Greek Revolution and the Belgian Revolution. Greek Revolution is because Europe had already decided that the Ottoman Empire, it's on its way out, it's on its last leg. So do we prop up a dying man, or do we help those that want to get away? And you kind of see a little bit of just back and forth of what are we going to do? Eventually they decide, let's help them. And so the Greeks, when they finally break away from the Ottomans, that's a watershed moment. Okay, it all begins to crumble from there. You have this idea of nationalism coming up again in Serbia, in Romania, in Bulgaria, a lot of Eastern European nations who are going to try to fight against the Ottoman Empire. If you choose one and side with them, you pretty much kind of have to decide with all of them. But Europe doesn't do that because why? That would make too much sense. So what they do is they're like, all right, we're going to support the Greeks. We're going to kind of support the, excuse me, that was my phone. I apologize. You should have your phone on silent too. I'm going to turn my phone on silent. Okay, sorry about that. You kind of have to, side with everyone who wants freedom from the Ottomans, but that's not what happens. When we look at the Belgian Revolution, again, this is one of those we're going to pick and choose who we support. The Belgians were historically part of the Netherlands as well as part of northern France. You've got two different peoples. You have the Francophones and the what are known as Flemish speakers. And they somehow decided, all right, we want to be away from France and from the Netherlands. And so we're going to create our own country. And the Belgian Revolution, again, is that test of the concert of Europe. The concert of Europe was supposed to have stopped it, but it didn't. What it actually did is it kind of helped it, because France is going, if I can get the Germans and the English to support a free Belgium, I can then exacerbate the tensions between them as well. And so there's like this backroom dealing, backroom arguing going on of, all right, we're going to support the Belgians, but we're not going to support all of the Belgians. We want to make sure that the Belgian leadership is a French-speaking Belgian leadership. We want to make sure that they're Catholic, not Protestant. So you've got these ideals that the Congress of Vienna was supposed to have created and followed, and it didn't happen. Okay, so that's kind of how the revolutions of 1848 actually started. Because otherwise, if these revolts had been crushed, maybe they wouldn't have happened, probably would have, but the results could have been different. Who knows, right? So from there, we have that spread of instability. Okay, again, always keep in the back of your mind that if you give a mouse a cookie thing, they're going to want more and more and more, and it just keeps spreading. Okay, so if we look at politically speaking, you've got all of these competing ideas. Constitutionalism. England by then was a staunch constitutional monarchy. Okay, by 1848, Queen Victoria, she was there, and she was a big personality, and she definitely had to be reckoned with. But the prime minister was the one who actually held the power. Queen Victoria made sure in no uncertain terms, you do not speak in public about politics. That is my job. You have liberalism as well. Not our liberalism we think of today. Okay, a lot of times people do get, baby analogy is a good analogy, yeah. People do get those a little confused. Liberalism here is more along the lines of free market. Okay, conservatism, we don't want free market, because if we give a free market, who has control? The leaders, or what we would call the invisible hand? Liberalism wants the invisible hand. And welcome to my cat. I apologize. He's probably going to do that a couple of times. You've got the spread of republicanism, which is different than constitutionalism. All right, in most European countries at the time, you had the two dueling ideas. Constitutionalism of let's have a monarch, but the monarch has got power constrained by, yes, he's back, I'm sorry, constrained by a constitution. Republicanism, that's American democracy, where we have no monarch, we have no head of state other than the one that we vote for. So that is also something that's changing in European ideals. We see more and more people wanting to get rid of this monarch idea. Also, with Napoleon, as weird as it sounds, he helped spread the idea that democracy is greater than a monarch, that it's greater than a conservative government or a government run by princes or an oligarchy. All right, so he did that by spreading the French revolutionary ideals. Okay, now he wanted to be in control, but he was convincing people to let him be in control through the democratic ideals of the French Revolution. And then probably most important politically is nationalism. This idea of you are now bound to a nation based off of shared history and culture and religion, where beforehand borders were very fluid. Okay, you could have been born in Austria, and by the time you died 50, 70 years later, you were gone through 3 different countries because you were conquered 3 different times. Now I am Serbian, I am Greek, or I am German, and I want to be part of one of those nations, not part of some big multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire. Economically speaking, capitalism, it's a great thing if you're the one making money, right? But if you were the one who was working in the factory and you worked those 12, 13-hour days and you weren't making a lot of money, capitalism's not that good for you. Imagine being where you are now at your age in 1840. You would have had 2 choices if you were not of an upper class. You would have been told, okay, you are going to go work in a factory, or we're going to ship you off to the country to go work on a farm, right? So capitalism, while it did help overall with their nation's economy, it actually exacerbated these class issues that we were seeing within the 1800s. Also at this time frame, we have famines that are happening all throughout the continent of Europe. Everyone usually knows about this time frame, the Irish potato famine, but it wasn't the only famine of the time. There were famines going on in Germany, in France, in Austria, and in Russia as well, and my cat back. So the Irish potato famine, though, is that highlight of what we call classic liberalism, where you have no government policy to help fix an economy. And when that happens, that's what happened and allowed so many people to die and so many people to be forced to emigrate. And then last, we have society. You've got that spread of Republican ideals, lower classes, even though they might not have been educated, this belief that their next generation could be, if we could get republicanism, this belief that if we broke that cycle of oligarchy or monarchy, we could make a more fearless and powerful middle and lower class. And then also, you do have a power vacuum issue. Okay, and I mean, as you can see here, the cat, right? He's kind of filling a power vacuum. He thinks that you guys are not there at all. And so he wants to fill that by walking in front of the screen. Okay, and so that's an example. And a real better example, though, is when you have a government like the German states, okay, the German Confederacy, which replaced the Holy Roman Empire, very weak. Okay, you're the king of Hanover. Great. What can you do? Nothing. Because you're surrounded by so many different people who have competing ideas and competing interests that if you do one thing, you're going to go against all the other ones and it's going to cause a war. So weak leaders also led to these ideas of the revolutions. So these are only going to be the key revolutions. There are a lot of them. I'm only going to cover 4 because these are the big 4 that I think you would be most likely to see. All right. That doesn't mean there weren't more, and that doesn't mean you shouldn't study the other ones. These are just going to be the ones that I cover. So we're going to talk about France first because France starts it all. You have France, King Louis Philippe, who was known as the Pear King. He was completely ineffectual. And when there were riots in Paris, he did what I always tell my students is what you never do. If you become the leader of a nation and your people are rioting, you never have your own army fire on your people. Because if you do, you've lost all legitimacy. You will never hold power without some kind of fight. And that's what happened with Louis Philippe. And he lost. He abdicates. There's a socialist government that takes over. The socialist government, it was instituting workhouses and work programs and helping people with insurance. And everyone thought it was going to be great. But they didn't fix the core issue that started the riots in the beginning, which was the middle class was shrinking. The rich were taking their money and moving it away so they didn't have to pay taxes. And because of that, their government ends up failing. And we see who was initially elected democratically as a leader, and ironically also as emperor, Napoleon III. So the French Revolution kind of is, you see again, that cycle, right? Weak leader, you have, all right, Mom, go away, Roku. Sorry, guys. So you have that weak leader, you've got the try to fix it, but they don't go to the key, and so they fail, and you have a reactionary leader come back. All right, so we go to the German states from here. You've got, again, a weak leader, right? You've got Frederick William IV. Not the best, not the worst, but in this case, he's weak because he gives in. And by giving in to the Frankfurt Assembly, that sets him up to fail. And it sets the revolution up to fail as well. Because the revolution, rather than taking over completely, offers him a deal. If he declines it, what are they going to do? Are they going to kill him? Are they going to replace him? They didn't know really either. And because of that, the Frankfurt Assembly ends up just kind of fizzling out, and their dream of uniting Germany is a failure. The key thing here, though, that I think a lot of people don't cover with the German Revolution of 1848. Initially, during this revolution, Otto von Bismarck, he is the one who supported that revolution. It wasn't until the failure of the revolution that he goes from being a liberal to a conservative. Might be a good piece of outside information you could use. Italy is a special case always when we talk about European history. So in this case, Italy is special because of its history, right? They have not been united since the fall of Rome in 476. I think that's right. Might be 453. Don't quote me. They have been controlled by foreign powers. Northern Italy mostly controlled by Austria and France. And then in Rome, the Pope is the one who's been in control. But when the Italian revolutions of 1848 happen, all of these people are not being able to maintain that control. But the Italians suffer one thing that the others didn't suffer as badly. In Italy, they're not as united in their ideals as much as the French or the Germans. Because while the French have their difference of socialism, communism, monarchy, etc., they're all French, okay? And the Germans, the same thing. You've got ones who want a kingdom and no king and democracy and constitutionalism, but they're all German. In Italy, they look at 476, thank you. They look at themselves as, I'm Roman, I am Venetian, I'm Genoan. They have very strong regional ties, not national ties. That nationalism is not going to come around for a little while. And even then, there's going to be issues with it because you have that strong regionalism. So because of that, the regionalism here, it acts against Italian and their belief in unification and the revolution of 1848. And so it fails. Eventually, you've got Austria, who's going to take over Venetia, and Emperor Napoleon III, he's going to take over Rome and send troops there. And the Italians never had a chance. Sadly, they didn't. So the last one we're going to cover for the 1848, the Austro-Hungarian Revolution. It is very important that you know here that they are not one country yet. That does not come until much later. Here we are still two separate countries with one king, who's known as the Emperor of Austria and the King of Hungary. It seems like it's a minor detail, but it's important to understand the revolution here, okay? Because at the time, you've got the Emperor of Austria who is in control of those lands. And in the Austrian lands, it is multi-ethnic, it's multi-religious, it's multilingual. As the King of Hungary, he is supposed to be the one who puts Hungarian interests first. But because the King of Hungary was a Habsburg and an Austrian, he never did. It was always the Austrian interests first. And so there is this revolt against that. It fails, both the Austrian Revolution and the Hungarian Revolution. The leaders are going to be taken out, but it does succeed in one thing, okay? Yes, the Habsburg dynasties. We call those the Kardashians in my classroom because we're not fans. So the one success of all of these revolutions is that Metternich, the guy who created the Concert of Europe, the guy who called together the Congress of Vienna, He's gone. He flees Vienna in terror and in shame, never to return. And because of that, what ends up happening is the Austrian king is now not just King of Austria, Emperor of Austria, he's King of Hungary in complete right. So what that means, because it's a little weird wording, is that he has a dual monarchy. Not yet united, but there's two parliaments now, and he answers to both. Okay, the parliaments, though, in Hungary really are just going to be rubber stamping what they do in Vienna. But it's this idea that you can be a leader of multiple countries with multiple parliaments and still have complete control. So from there, we're going to go to the Industrial Revolution, because the Industrial Revolution is probably, after the revolutions of 1848, in my opinion, the most important thing that you see out of this century. Economically speaking, right, the Industrial Revolution, it is good, it's bad, and it's got some really ugly parts, okay? Good parts of the Industrial Revolution. We've got new innovations, new technology. We've got a growing middle class. We've got the spread of wealth. But that also goes to the bad part, because that growing middle class is only to a select few. I hope you guys don't mind if I don't hold him. He's just going to keep walking back and forth. So I'm going to hold him. You also have this exploitation of the poor. Example would be the Enclosure Acts in England. Yes, they were before the 1800s, but that really began to exacerbate the problems that the Industrial Revolution created, which is overcrowding in cities, rapid urbanization, things like that. Politically speaking, the Industrial Revolution does lead to a breakdown in politics, in the conservative ideal. Conservatism in this time frame was control of the economy. They wanted to make sure that only the aristocracy, only the rich were the ones who could keep control of industry and make money. And as the Industrial Revolution spread and sped up, sorry, cat, we couldn't do that. And then that leads to the development of liberal policies, okay, what we call classical liberalism for your economics. And this idea of free markets was relatively new. But free markets don't always fix things, right? Because the Irish potato famine, England was having at that time a liberal government that was going to allow a free market. Middle class, MC stands for middle class. The English free market policy actually made the Irish potato famine worse, because they're like, well, if they want food, they're going to pay for it, or they're going to work harder and make more. They wouldn't actually bring in any help to help the Irish, which made it even worse, which compounded and compounded until you have over 1 million people dead, over 2 million kicked out of their country, willingly, some, most not willingly. And then reforms. We do see good things come out of this, right? We see some reforms. First, child labor laws. You can only work 12 hours a day, and then 8 hours a day, and then it goes down and down and down. Age as well goes up. You can't work until you're a certain age. We see the development of unions. Unions are the reason we have an 8-hour workday, that we have things like insurance and safety protocols. And out of also all of this, we do get, for most people, greater access to politics and social life. Right? England especially does give a lot of new people access to this by giving non-land holding men the right to vote, by continuing to allow people to innovate and move up in station, rather than you're born poor, you'll remain poor, you'll die poor. If you work hard enough in this time period, you can come out of it. Not always, but maybe the next generation will, off of what you've started. So that takes us to probably the biggest person of the 1800s, to me at least, and his counterpart, who's not as big, but equally important. You've got Bismarck and Garibaldi, right? unification of Italy and Germany, that is the nail in the coffin of the balance of power. It's that nail in the coffin of the concert of Europe. Once those two countries unify, Europe is on its crash course towards World War One. Okay, Bismarck knew it too, and he tried to prevent it, but you basically can't stop it now. Okay, so politically speaking, why do we have unification? Well, we have unification because of the collapse of the concert of Europe. The revolutions of 1848 basically showed the concert of Europe wasn't working even before that happened in the 1930s. In the Italian states and German states specifically, those revolutions highlighted the weakness of the leaders there. And so that caused more people wanting a single strong leader. And in Germany, we have Otto von Bismarck, and in Italy, we have Garibaldi, Giuseppe Garibaldi. I blame World War I on Friedrich firing Bismarck. Yeah, I can agree with that. Historically speaking, there's also a lot of reasons why these places would want to be united. Okay, Italy has got this fantastic history of being an empire and, you know, causing the spread of the Roman language and Roman history and art and belief. And why wouldn't they want to be united again? They live literally in the backyard of all that. They saw that all the time. Bismarck had this idea of what is known as Großdeutschland, or Big Germany. For him, being a German speaker was more important than being from a specific town or being from a specific place. He wanted to unify not just the 30 German states, but also the Austrian state with them to create Großdeutschland. It wouldn't happen, and he was eventually going to settle for what's known as Kleindeutschland, or small Germany, of those 30 German states, with Prussia being the biggest. Italy and Germany also have been having a history of subjugation by larger powers. Okay, Italy has been taken over by the Austrians, by the French, by the English a couple centuries beforehand. They've been attacked by the Ottomans. They've got a long, storied history of other people using them for their wealth. Germany in the 1600s, we saw how the different religious groups and then later the political groups of the French and the Swedish used their nation as the ground zero for the 30 Years' War. And that destroyed that place. And so because of that, unification could theoretically prevent that from happening again, okay? And then most importantly to me in the historical place is that in Germany and Italy, you have these centers of shifts of thinking. In Italy, we had the Renaissance. We had the rebirth of all of those classical thinkers and philosophers. And in Germany, we have the birth of the philosophers like Karl Marx, and you have Nietzsche, people like that. That gives them a sense of pride that they want to not just hold on to it, they want to hold on to it, use it to unify and spread. Lastly, militarily, unification didn't happen overnight. Okay, unification happened over a series of wars and agreements, both political and military, that allowed for them to unify. Again, both these strong military leaders of Bismarck and Garibaldi allowed for that unification to happen. The Italian leader, Cavour, he was a great leader, but he wasn't a strong military leader. So that's why his unification plan in the 1830s for Italy ultimately failed. And then with those revolutions of 1848, this is allowing somebody to fill the void that has been created with the power vacuum that was created by the quashing of those revolutions. Because even though conservatism won, it left a power void, because really there was nobody who was strong enough to take over to prevent it from happening again. And so the second to last thing that we're going to cover before I open up to questions, it's going to be imperialism. Because imperialism is so integral to understanding how the end of the 1800s and thus World War I happened, okay? And so imperialism, industrialization is a really big reason for why it happens, okay? If you've got industrialization, you need a lot of things. One, you need to be able to sell your stuff, because eventually everyone around you is either going to own it or not want it. Imperialization allows me to go to new places around the world and sell whatever I created. And then I need raw materials to create those things, right? We have the rape of Congo by the Belgians, who realized that the world needed rubber in massive, massive quantities of it. Imperialization allowed Belgium, a tiny country, to have a massive impact on the global stage. Prestige, pride, saying that you are the ones that, went out and conquered the jungle or conquered the frozen wastelands, wherever they went and imperialized, that prestige, that carries a lot of weight in Europe. And then, industrialization led to imperialism, which led to more innovation. Okay, the idea of that, malaria medicine, okay, quinine. Why would we have ever come up with quinine if we didn't want to go into the interior of Africa to bring to them our new materials and innovations we created, which then led to the development of these colonies, which led to more innovations. It's kind of like a cascading effect, okay? From their population, this is not something I know that everyone talks about, something we talk about in my classroom, because a lot of people don't look at it this way, but population can be a problem, especially in nations that are still trying to figure out how do we prevent revolution. So one is this idea that let's send people on adventure. Okay, if you've ever heard of Tarzan or of the Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book, those types of books give this idea that if you go to a colony of one of the European countries, you're going to go on an adventure, and it's going to be amazing. It's going to change your life. Rudyard Kipling, we also get the idea of white man's burden. Okay, that being white people, we need to go to these inferior populations and help them understand what's wrong with them and how to do better. Very, very bad. Don't think that it's a good thing, because it's not, right? And then a simple thing, you've got overcrowding in cities. If you've got so many people flooding to these cities for work and there's no work, well, what do I do with them? Put them on a ship and send them to be colonizers in India or Australia or Malaya or places like that. Go on, Roku. You're getting on my nerves. And so also the Christianization of these places. Spreading the Christian message was a big reason for some people to go, bringing to them salvation to the savages and preventing them from being doomed to hell and fire and brimstone. That's a very powerful reason for people to want to leave their homeland to go to someplace they'll probably never leave again, because they'll die there. Then we get into more economics and politics here with competition. Okay, European nations are in constant competition with them. Even today, they're still in competition with themselves. It's just on a different scale. One of the things about having colonies is you get to test new technology, right? The Gatling gun, other machine gun type things that were created before World War I. What better way to test than against an enemy who's preventing us from taking the resources that we deserve, okay? So then you also have the European nations wanting to say that they are the best, that they conquered the most, they have the most, that they're spending and receiving the most. That idea is a really big motivator, because you can spread that into your population, right? Think about when we reach the North and South Pole, or when we reach the top of Mount Everest. That idea of being that person representing that nation. The moon is a good one as well. It's powerful. It makes the average man want to do something they otherwise might not want to, okay? So results of imperialism. Obviously, you have this loss of autonomy for wherever the Europeans went, okay? In Africa, you have the loss of autonomy of these African tribes. You have the loss of autonomy of not just African tribes, but also in like South Africa, other Europeans. Okay, in North Africa, which was supposed to be under Ottoman control, they're losing that autonomy that the Ottomans gave them under their system. In Southeast Asia and India, they're losing their autonomy there. We also have the European institutionalized class division. It sometimes matches African and Asian, it sometimes doesn't. But this concept of being highborn, going to certain schools and mingling with certain people, and then lowborn and they're being separate, sometimes known as what's called the upstairs downstairs. If you watch any kind of British TV, that gets institutionalized in law in a lot of places. In South Africa, that gets institutionalized in apartheid. Okay, everyone usually knows about the basics of apartheid. You have white and black, but it's not just white and black, actually. You have white, you have colored, and then colored was delineated between Indian colored, white, black, and mixed colored, Indian black colored, white Indian colored, etc. It was divided so specifically that gets codified in a lot of countries' laws post-imperialism. And then for better or for worse, the lives of Africans, the lives of Asians, they're altered, and they're altered forever. I'm sure we could make arguments for both of these, that it was altered for the good and it was altered for the bad. What we need to look at, though, is not the good and the bad here, but just in the ways that it was altered, all right? One of the good things about a really good historian is that they look at it from an objective standpoint, right? If we look at white man's burden with our view today, the first thing most people are gonna be like is, oh my God, this is so racist. But if we take a step back and look at it objectively from the time period they're coming from, it makes sense. It doesn't make it right, it just makes it make sense, right? I hope that makes sense to you. If not, let me know, ask a question. I'll expand upon that later. Last thing I'm gonna cover before I open up to questions, guys, is art movements. Now, I'm gonna preface this with, I am not an artist. I can barely draw a straight line. It's not my favorite thing to cover. So these are the art movements that I would say are the most important, but I could be wrong. Your teachers might tell you other ones. So I would say take everything you get about art, keep it in your bank. The first two actually, though, don't start in the 1800s. Okay, they start right before the 1800s. Neoclassicism being the one that brings back the classical elements, but on a grander scale. We normally associate neoclassicism with the Napoleonic time period and the French Revolution time period, right after useless art, and starts with an F. It'll come to me. The next one is Romanticism, not Fauvism. No, Fragonard is probably one of the most famous painters. Give me a moment to think about it. Rococo, thank you, yes. So Romanticism is the next one. This is a romantic, it's supposed to bring out emotion, not necessarily love, okay? One of the most famous paintings I know of is of a sailing ship that's a slave ship that's going down in the ocean. The slaves are drowning, right? That does not bring out love, that brings out sadness, it brings out horror, but it makes you feel, okay? It makes you want to do something about it. And so Romanticism is also a reaction to Napoleon. Okay, Romanticism, you've got Edward Burke, who is probably one of the most famous romantics. He's also a politician. Realism, this one, my kids have always like, well, what is realism? And my answer usually is it's real, meaning it shows life as it is. Okay, it's not trying to evoke emotion. It's not trying to make it look grander than it really was. It's not trying to alter the view. It's just going to say, okay, if I'm a barkeep, I'm going to paint you the way you look when you're doing your job, okay? Then you have Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. Impressionism is probably most famous from Monet, and he did Water Lilies, if I'm not mistaken. That's probably one that I do know. It's about light and how light moves, and it's about when you take that ordinary subject and you show it through movement, okay? And then post-impressionism, that is where we go, well, why do I want to look at things in their natural light? Why can't I be odd? Why can't I take it and make it look brighter and more vivid? or darker and more scary. Okay, I always think of Van Gogh when it comes to post-impressionism, like The Screen or Starry Night. But you also have Cézanne and Seurat. These are both very famous post-impressionist painters. Their main idea was to go against the natural depiction of light. Okay. So these are the art movements I would say you need to know. There might be more. If you know more, type them out so your co-Euro students can learn them. I am not an art teacher, and I know next to nothing. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to pretend I do. The last thing I will tell you is, please, if you need to write an essay about this time period, remember that the 19th century is the 1800s, not the 1900s. It's a very common mistake amongst everybody, not just Euro students or AP students or students in general. Adults do this too, all right? But remember that the 19th century is the 1800s. So what I'm going to go from here is I'm going to go open it up to your questions, and I will answer as many of them as I can. If you haven't typed it here in this little question box, please do, because I think I missed some of them up on the chat box. We'll start first with Caitlin. Did liberals or conservatives dominate British politics at this time? Yes, they did. But I think you kind of mean which ones dominated at this time. Correct me if I'm wrong. The beginning of the century is going to be dominated by conservatives. Okay, we're going to be looking at people who are reacting to Napoleon, who are reacting to Waterloo. They're going to want to hold on to as much power as possible in order to prevent that rapid social change. Towards the later end of the century, we see a small shift, not a big one, but a small shift towards liberal politics. You really don't get a fully elected liberal government until the 1900s. The Whigs would be closest you would get to a liberal government. But yeah, it's dominated by the conservatives mostly. Britain, for whatever reason, has always been, let's change everything and let's change nothing. And so because of that, they kind of like are always antithetical to each other, right? You've got, the conservatives who are in power and all the people screaming for change. And then when you get change, the people are like, oh, never mind, I don't want it. And the government's like, give me change. So I hope that answers that there for you. Let me know if you needed anything else. How did the emancipation of serfs impact Russia? Can you please talk about the East versus West during the 1800s? Lucia, yes. So the emancipation of serfs impacted Russia in quite a few different ways. The most drastic way that I would say it impacted Russia is the rapid social change. Okay, because remember, if you're serf, you are born and then bound to that land that you were born on. Okay, you're not necessarily a slave, but you're like right above. Okay, you can't leave without the permission of your lord. You can't go and do anything new, go to school or anything without the permission of your lord. So being born a serf was very, very bad, especially in Russia. With the emancipation of serfs, though, that begins to rapidly change their society. We see socialism and communism and anarchism all take really strong hold in the East because of this. Because as people get their freedom, even if it's just a tiny bit, right, they're going to fight for every inch and centimeter and foot and meter, whatever you want to call it, that they can get. I would say that's the biggest difference between East versus West. Now, the other difference is in 1848, okay? In the West, you had a lot of revolutions, right? France, Germany, Russia, Italy, not Russia, excuse me. France, Germany, Austria, Italy, Hungary, places like that. In Russia and Britain, no revolution, all right? That's because in Britain, they were giving just enough reforms to prevent it. And in Russia, they had so much control that it couldn't happen, right? That doesn't mean they didn't try, because they did. Okay, you've got Alexander II, who was blown up, right? And they tried to kill him in 6 different ways. Everybody did. But when they did that, they really kind of screwed themselves over, because Alexander III, He represses everything. Nicholas represses everything. So that's the thing between Russia and the West, is that Russia is slower to change, much, much slower to change. But when they do change, it's drastic and often very violent. So I hope that helps, Lucia. Let me know. Can we link all of these to being driven by nationalism? By all of these, are you meaning the revolutions of 1848 or art movements or just the 1800s in general? I'm going to guess here, correct me if I'm wrong in the chat box, that you're talking like the revolutions. You can link most of them to nationalism, not all of them. I would say some would start as economic, like the French Revolution, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, they all start as economic. Nationalism comes in later, but I wouldn't say that nationalism is in all of them. Most of them, yes, but not all of them. So hope that helps. Not a European history student, so sorry if this is a bad question, but is there any connection between urbanization, like in London, for example, during the Industrial Revolution, and realism, since I know that cities in the 19th century were really cramped, dirty, generally, disappeared, generally not great. Sorry again if this is a bad question. Dylan, that is not a bad question. That's a great question, and thanks for asking it. Yes, you can totally make that connection. And that is one of the things that realism wanted to show, was this is real life, right? This is what a miner looks like as they come out of the mine. This is what a child looks like who has not gotten the proper nutrition that they've needed. This is what it looks like when you see rich people walking through a park, not doing anything, right? It is a real life. And it is totally connected to that idea of urbanization and the displacement of peoples and the Industrial Revolution. That is a great connection. And then you did say, at what times is it disturbing for the sake of being disturbing, showing real life? I'm going to guess here you mean like how vivid it is, in the sense of like maybe showing nakedness or sexual content. You're talking Victorian England, Victorian Europe. No, that would, no. We really don't see that until late 1800s, really not until the 1900s, if that. And so I would say you don't see it just to disturb for the sake of being disturbed. If it's disturbing, it's because it's showing you what it, like I said, like what a child looks like coming out of a mine or something like that, but it's not going to just do it for shock value. What is the difference between new imperialism and old imperialism? Great question. New imperialism and old imperialism both can also be called colonialization. We tend to make the differentiation here when we talk about how new imperialism was because of the Industrial Revolution. We needed new markets. We needed more raw materials. We needed to find ways to compete with other European nations. Old imperialism, I kind of explained it to my students as it was an accident, right? Columbus truly thought he was going to hit India. That's why we have what's known as the West Indies. And then when you realize that it wasn't, old imperialism was more of a, we're going to use mercantilism rather than direct control. So I hope that answers that. Let me know if you need me to explain it anymore. What forms have family, class, and social groups taken? Paige, can you clarify what you mean? And I will come back to that question because I'm not exactly sure what you mean there. So right there, and I'll come back to it. We're going to go to Alice as while we wait on the clarification. How did the Second Industrial Revolution impact politics, and what are some of the continuities during this time? Very good question, Alice. And Caitlin added, also differences between First and Second Industrial Revolutions. Also a very good question. So Second Industrial Revolution impacted politics because this is what also is known as heavy industry, okay? Where you're talking about cars, trains, heavier trains, the beginning of flight, mechanization of creation. So you see the beginnings of things like the factory line, assembly line, things like that. So that impact on politics is going to have massive changes because of that competition. Now, continuity-wise, what I would say is that the continuities you see in this time frame really are for the lower class and the lower middle class, okay? They're not making that much money. they're not coming up in the world like it seems that they should be. Okay, we still have massive poverty. We still have massive inequality. We also see actually a hardening of women's roles, where women should not be working. Women should be at home, raising children, having children. Women are, that idea that there's a separation of the man earns and the women, takes care of. That's a continuity I would say you could talk about. To answer your question, Caitlin, the biggest difference here is in the way that it is created by, how do I explain this? In the first industrial revolution, it's using steam. Okay, and so it's using water, right? So water frame, steam, and coal, things to make it get hot and boil. In the second industrial revolution, we're moving away from that into the combustible engine, into using oil, into using petroleum. So bigger projects can be made. It has a longer impact, a longer usage, doesn't break down as much. Also, we move away from the early beginnings of movable parts and making separate things to now we have specific training on what you and you alone are going to make, right? You're going to make this gasket that's going to be put onto a rod that is going to help something go up and down. Well, you're only going to be taught how to make that gasket, okay? And that's part of the assembly line idea. So I would say that is one of the big differences between the first and second industrial revolutions. Hope that helps there, guys. Let me know. Paige still kind of waiting. What forms have European governments taken and how have these changed time? That is a very loaded question. I will try to answer it as succinctly as I can. They've taken every form and no form and in between, okay? You've got monarchy, you've got democracy, you've got constitutional monarchy, you have empire, you have dictator. They've changed over time based on the needs and or wants of the people, all right? In the 1800s, mostly we only had two. We had democracy and monarchy. The difference was in how much of each that we had. In Western Europe, we tended to see more along the democratic monarchy line, not completely, obviously. You have places that were still very much full monarchy absolutists, like we saw in Russia. Russia's an absolute monarchy, Ottoman Empire, absolute monarchy. They've changed, though, to adapt to what the Industrial Revolution was bringing in, right? They had to, because if they didn't, they were going to fall. Okay, that's one of the things that we see in the 19th century is that rapid change, if you did not keep up, you were going to fall and you were going to fail. So hope that helps there. Let me know. Juliana, can you explain Otto von Bismarck? And then was he more conservative or liberal, Caitlin asks. Oh, that's a very big question. Do we have enough time? So Otto von Bismarck is the it man of the 1800s, if you ask me. Some might argue Metternich. I don't agree, but it really doesn't matter. I can answer quickly for Caitlin. He was way more conservative, like way more conservative. But, and this is a very big but, he was also a pragmatist, okay? That means that if he wanted to get a government policy passed, for example, health insurance, which he did, he is going to use the liberals and the socialists to get that passed, even if it goes against his own political party. Because for him, it's not about being stuck in the ideology of conservatism. It's about the pragmatism of what is known as realpolitik. Yes, strike that. Realpolitik is, I want power, I've got power, how do I keep power? Well, I keep power by making sure that I'm giving everybody what they want and nobody what they want, right? I'm going to give the liberals their insurance. I'm going to give the conservatives taking away freedom of speech. I'm going to give the socialists, an 8-hour workday, and keep going and going. And so you're playing them all against each other in this almost like, I don't know if you've ever watched Big Bang Theory, if rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock, kind of like that. There's so much more I can explain about him. I just don't have time and I want to get to some more questions. So hopefully that helps give you a big overview of him. let me know. And then is Russia behind during this whole course because they did not go through Renaissance? Lightman, Lucia, big question. Yeah, I would say that's part of what it is. But I mean, as others have pointed out, you have, Catherine the Great. She was an enlightened monarch, keyword. In monarch, you've got Peter the Great as well, who want to Westernize the nation. I would say that it's not really that. It's that they're more reactionary than Western Europe. Western Europe was willing to at least look inwards and go, why did this happen? Okay, it happened because I did something wrong. I'm not going to change it, but now I know how to prevent it. Russia was more of like, niet, not going to happen. I will kill you. I will put you down. I will make sure that you never rise back up. You are not going to survive this uprising because it's all about control. For Russia, it's all about control. I mean, if you think about like their environment, right? It's cold, harsh winters. Control is something you've got to have if everything around you is not controlled. And the czars kind of exemplified that, right? There was so much intrigue with the boyars that they've got to find some way to exert that they're the leader and no one else. So I hope that answers that question. Come back, may you talk about the Russian revolutions? Yeah, I can talk quickly about them. So you have the Decembrist Revolution after the death of Alexander I, and eventually Nicholas I is the one who wins. This is because the military wanted to modernize. You have the subsequent uprisings. I wouldn't necessarily call them revolutions in the 1800s against Tsarist rule. Most famously, you have the one that's against Alexander II and his death. Alexander III, he is going to squash any kind of dissidence. He's going to institute what's known as Russification, which is where you are forced to learn the Russian language. If you are not Eastern Orthodox, you need to convert to Eastern Orthodox or you pay way higher taxes, as well as just any kind of repression of individual rights. Nicholas is the one who has the revolutions, 1905, and then the big two, the February and October ones. So that's not really going to show up in this time period. Really, it's the Decembrist one and Alexander II. So hopefully that answers that question for you. How have Europeans sought contact interaction with other parts of the world? I think, I'm not sure what the name is here, but imperialism, triangular trade, Columbian exchange, new markets, those are all really good answers. I can't really add anything else on top of that, other than you might also include proselytization of Christianity as one. So what is the difference between Congress of Vienna and the Congress of Europe, Loza? The difference is in their goal. The Congress of Vienna was to fix what Napoleon broke, meaning reset Europe. Put back all of the monarchs, and go back to conservatism. The Concert of Europe was to protect what they fixed, right? So crush rebellion, crush any kind of fighting against the leadership, things like that. Hope that helps. I'll answer that last. How did the Fed revolutions lead to World War I? That's a very long question, so I'm not going to answer it completely simply because we are over time. But what I will say is that, to me, you can make that direct connection from Napoleon to World War I, because Napoleon spreads nationalism, and nationalism led to a lot of those revolts in 1848. The failure of those revolts leads to the squishing of the individual rights, which leads to, what do we do with these people? Let's imperialize. Imperialization leads to a lot of competition between the European nations, which then leads to the Berlin Conference. It leads to the unification of Italy and Germany. And when that happens, you have Europe on this crash course towards World War I. And Bismarck saw it. He really did. That's why he used realpolitik and the balance of power to prevent it from happening. Okay, I mean, when he was dismissed by the Kaiser, he told the Kaiser, mark my words, from 1 month from when I die, you will go down. He wasn't wrong. A couple of years happened, but he wasn't wrong. The Kaiser went down. Okay, so moving on. I've got one question left that I can answer. Let me see if there's anything else I can miss on the right. Ignacio, can you make that connection of realism to U.S. history with muckrakers? I don't know. I'm really bad with U.S. history. I focused on Middle Eastern and European history in college, so I don't know the answer to that. I would ask Tom Ritchie, because he teaches U.S. history. The last question, have I seen Avengers Endgame? I have not seen Avengers Endgame. I do know that SpongeBob did die, and that the Black Widow becomes the Queen of the Earth, and we all drink chocolate milk for the rest of our lives. So, guys, I hope this was helpful. We went a little over time. I don't mind at all. So if you have other questions, there's going to be another Euro review on Wednesday, and we will see you guys then. Thanks for coming, and you guys have a good weekend. Make sure you guys get some rest, okay? Bye, guys.